All right, Shane, quick question.
Okay.
How long should a newsletter be if you want busy tech investors and founders to read it?
As short as possible. I mean, these are people who time box their bathroom breaks on their calendars. So you want it to be snappy, punchy. That's at least the convention.
Okay, so that's what I've been told at pretty much every company I've ever worked with or consulted for, especially in tech, right? Busy founders, VCs, PE people, long form content never will work. But that leads me to our guest today that we're going to talk to, which is Mario Gabriele, who is the founder of The Generalist, which is this publication that's one of the biggest tech publications on Substack that regularly publishes 10,000 to 15,000 word essays, that charges a super high subscription fee, that does sponsored content packages that look like SaaS contracts, essentially, and is winning big. It basically breaks every conventional rule of media that we know and has built this kind of little empire that's one of the most influential newsletters and small media companies that I know are out there, full stop, in the tech industry.
So hold on. A business book is generally about 60,000 words, maybe a little more. So his newsletter is a quarter of a business book, and it's one of the most popular in this audience with no time.
Yeah. It's basically he's getting people to read these super long form deep dives on specific companies. He's creating these digital products that are kind of like startup databases. He's built really interesting community elements in the past where he's brought in like VCs and PE people somehow to analyze S1s for him. And I honestly have no idea quite how it works as well as it does.
I mean, this is so zaggy, and I had no idea that this was what we were getting into with Mario before. I mean, I've stopped reading, the tech industry as I've gone more into the entertainment industry, but I'm sort of blown away that this strategy is working.
Yeah, it's straight up one of my favorite tech newsletters that's out there. It is almost like a media mystery, right? That I've wondered for a long time on how he built this, right? Like, how did Mario do this? Exactly, because the conventional wisdom that everyone says is like, even just stop writing altogether. Like, everything should be a f***ing TikTok. It's a pressure that I think we both feel as writers.
Yeah, I'm sort
all
of
the time,
jealous.
right?
Like this, I don't want to do more reels. I want to write more long form stuff. So I'm sort of jealous to hear this.
Yeah, and homie like said that in 2021 that he was making $300,000 a year from this as a media company, and I know it's only grown since then.
By himself.
Yeah, by himself, and used to just straight up be a fiction writer, like a man after our own hearts, who went from fiction writing into this weird world of tech. So,
I love everything about this.
Yeah, so we're having him on just to try and steal his secrets. Like, think of this maybe as a little bit of a covert operation here, at least for me, as I fantasize about, building a larger media business right now. So yeah, what do you say? Let's have him on.
Let's get to it.
Mario Gabriele, welcome to Art of the Zag.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we wanted to have you on this show because we were coming up with the concept of it, right? People who are zagging when everyone else is zigging in business and media and storytelling. You are such a platonic ideal of this concept because with The Generalist, you've built this, what seems like an extremely highly profitable and successful media company off the idea.
Tell us now if that's wrong, and we'll just we'll pivot.
we'll end it here.
What's gone? Yeah. We want to know what went wrong.
Yeah. Oh
yeah. Things are going well, but could always be better.
Yeah. So this seemingly, we'll find out how successful. Maybe get you to share your tax returns.
Perfect.
Media company off of this idea of publishing long form journalism about the tech industry for an audience of VCs and founders, which everyone says doesn't read, doesn't have time to do that. A really strong community where everyone says everyone's too busy for community. Breaking just a lot of the best practices that people tell you about starting a media business. So I just want to start by hearing your story. Like, who is Mario? How did you build this thing?
Wow. That's a difficult question to answer. Straight in with a deep philosophy.
Who are you?
I don't know if I trust my own self-knowledge enough to really give a super definitive answer, but I think I had a very peripatetic career sort of up to the Generalist, where I tried a lot of different things across different sectors and very different styles of working. I initially thought I wanted to be a lawyer, so I worked at a law firm for a little bit. I went to culinary school and cooked for a little bit. I was always, writing in the background, and then, got into tech and VC. And so each of those were strange little chapters. I don't think there was any sign of what a realistic end goal might look like from any of them. But as I think it was, Steve Jobs says, the dots always make sense backwards when you can sort of draw the line between them. And so I think that was the case, at least partially here. There's no cooking arm of the Generalist, but the other pieces sort of came together.
I was going to say, like, anything from cooking that like informed something that you're doing here, or is it purely a side quest?
It's mostly a side quest, I would say. It does instill like a good sense of discipline. I think there's something really, really difficult about working in a kitchen. And, I was someone who I think in general had been like relatively driven academically and stuff like that. So it wasn't, like some, miraculous turning point in my sense of discipline, but it probably helped because I do think, that was some of the hardest working people I ever saw was, working the line of a kitchen. And honestly, passion, because you have to be insanely passionate to do that job, because it's sort of, from a pragmatic perspective, makes no sense to do it. It's not well paid. The hours are terrible. It's really bad for your health. And so it only really makes sense to do it if you are so deeply obsessed with this craft that you kind of can't imagine doing anything else. And so perhaps there was, some unconscious element there that showed me what like real drive and desire looks like in a very different format than, a more academic person sees it.
Yeah, well, you just described what it feels like to be a writer, I think, in many ways, right?
Yes, that's
like,
true.
Why would you do this?
And you were a fiction writer, right, before you got into tech.
Yes, I mean, an aspirational fiction writer. Like, I definitely wrote a lot of fiction, but I never published it. And so that was probably how I got like theoretical 10,000 hours of writing practice in, was I was going to a workshop every week. I was, delivering pages every week for about 10 years. And so I really learned, I think, how to hit a deadline, even if it was an internal deadline, and have that mean something for myself. Like, accept a lot of feedback, frankly, which now with the Generalist, I get feedback from, 160,000 people. And so it probably started with that writing group. And yeah, really like care about the sentence level craft of these things and try and improve on it. So yeah, there was a lot that I learned from that.
So what was the pivot point from like law, fiction writing into covering tech? Like, that feels like a hard turn. And then to get the type of expertise and kind of status that you developed, like, what was that journey like, and how did you unlock that?
There were honestly like many pivot points, and that's just probably the sign of someone who has like a huge lack of clarity for a good chunk of their early career. I worked at the law firm and probably had clarity that this was not a good fit for me within a few weeks, but I made it a year. And that was really, frankly, I was working on cases that theoretically should have been interesting. It was one of the first Madoff cases, and then also some of what the sort of New York City's response to Hurricane Sandy and how they were administering some of that sort of relief funding. So, it was like a good test in the sense that I got to see what were not the world's most boring cases, but still somehow it really did not resonate with me. The style of work that a lawyer does, like blue booking, reading case law, and really torturing a sentence to death. It is a very specific style of writing that absolutely I don't particularly admire, I must say. That became quite clear that it wasn't the right fit. And then, it took several other strange leaps to make it to tech. And I'm happy to go into them, but I wouldn't want to hear monologue for you.
No. We want to hear your story, man. Like, so give us that, well, like, what was that strange leap that brought you into the tech world?
Well, so I started to write fiction. I'd always written fiction, as a kid and high school and college. And so I was doing that sort of at night while I was at the law firm. I was doing night school because I needed something to stimulate my brain. I really didn't feel like I got that in the environment, which was more stultifying. And so then I thought, gosh, I got to do something totally different, because this, very long held plan of, going to law school and then, going to Washington, D.C. and becoming a senator one day as the very minimum, these were the sort of like grand plans of a power hungry 22-year-old who, imagines he's going to have some, huge impact on the world. And that was very much to me like the most legible way one had impact, right? Was like through politics. And I came to believe that was a very old paradigm that no longer held. But it took this sort of journey through cooking, which was really like a sense of, let's rip everything up. Let's try something that really appeals to you and speaks to you at some fundamental level, even if it doesn't really make as much sense. Did a lot of writing still during that time. Then I went to grad school. I focused on international development, and that was sort of, let's say, the compromise between politics and a different form of impact. I sort of thought, okay, well, I'm not really buying this law school version, so maybe the better version for me is to go to the UN or the World Bank. And then I became very skeptical about that because I really felt like I don't see a great deal of impact from a lot of these organizations, or at least not at the speed that seemed to make sense to me. And so it was really during that I started to realize that the interventions that I found most interesting and impactful were technology. I was like, wow, if you look at Kenya, what is the most impactful thing that seems to have happened there in the past 10 years? It's M-Pesa, this digital money transmission service. That is what has brought so many people into the economy. And why am I spending all this time learning in grad school how to like format a brief for the UN when that doesn't feel like a paradigm that makes sense anymore? And so it really was a lesson in feeling like this new era that we live in is so mediated through technology. And if you care at all about sort of playing a part in the way our world works and hopefully making it better, that is like actually a much more asymmetric way to try and do it. And so, there were a few things that happened after that, but that was really sort of like, let's say the turning point. And you'll have to forgive me because that was very long.
No, not at all. And I think it's like a journey arc that Shane and I both resonate with, right? People start off as journalists, got into becoming tech entrepreneurs because we saw this as a sort of pathway of what the future is, right? And where power kind of accrues, and where you can have the biggest impacts. I think that resonates really deeply with us. And I know amongst our subscribers, like a lot of people as well. So then what was like the spark for the Generalist, right? Like, was that your tech writing off the bat where you're like, I want to go do these deep profiles on companies and really understand it? Was it something else? Like, what was that next pivot point?
And why for yourself? Why not, join the team at Fast Company or at, Time Magazine? Why go on your own after? I mean, it seems like you had identified really impactful organizations that you thought you could be part of in the previous sort of version of your vision.
Yeah, I guess I was probably ignorant enough of the media outlets in the space that I was comfortable sort of condescending is too harsh a word, but not taking them too seriously and imagining that they would be particularly good. And so I sort of imagined, well, I don't know what the standard is, but I bet I could do something better. Maybe that's optimism or arrogance or something like that, or just sort of disguised insecurity. Who knows? But probably it was helpful to be so ignorant because it did allow me to be sort of the right amount of delusional. And I started it while I was at a VC firm, and it was really born out of the fact that I was still every morning before work, and this was a habit, since I started, I would get up an hour or two before work or before grad school and just write my book. And I had eventually a boss who was like, what are you doing there? I see you, when I'm grabbing my coffee in the morning and you're always there and you're always like, furiously typing. What's going on? And so he became a bit of a mentor. And at a certain point, he was like, you should really think about writing about tech. It will be useful for your job. You might meet interesting people out of it. It might just sort of surface your ideas in a broader audience. And to me, that didn't sound that interesting. I was like, why would I want to surface my ideas to a broader audience? Like, who wants to hear what I have to say? I'm like an associate at a venture firm. What nonsense could I possibly spew? But somehow it was enough of a little virus in my head that at some point I thought, well, okay, I have one thing that I'd like to write. Rather than put it on Medium, why don't I try this new thing called Substack and see if I make it a newsletter. And then it just took on a bit of a life of its own, where even just from that first article, something interesting happened. Enough interesting things happened that I thought, this is leverage, and I'm actually able to sort of tangibly feel it.
I didn't realize you launched this off on Substack off the bat. So were you like one of the first early users of Substack when it launched?
Yeah, I suppose. I don't know like what number. There were definitely other people who had been there, because I had seen a few folks in venture do this thing, and I was like, I don't really know what this tool is. Like, why is this better or worse than Medium? It was mostly out of just sort of like an early adopters mentality that I was like, okay, well, this is the new thing, so I'll try the new thing because that would be fun, without having thought through like, yes, it's really useful to have an audience that, you don't have to win back every single article.
So was there a moment that was like a spark where you're like, I have something here? Or are you just grinding, kind of writing for no one for a long time? Like, what was that journey like getting it off the ground?
Certainly I wrote for very small numbers of people for a long time, but I would say that it never felt like no one to me. And I would say it felt sort of meaningful and interesting to me from the very beginning, where just, again, from that first article, I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 4 people reached out to me who I would have had no reason to hear from otherwise, who were interesting and, in some dimension impressive to me, and who had read my work and like engaged with it in some way. And that to me was like miraculous. That seemed insane that I had just done that, and then this sort of magical thing happened afterwards. And so it very quickly went from like, hey, I have this one thing to write, to like, I better hit my next week's deadline because I'm very motivated to do this. And, probably for better or worse, like if you put some sort of set of metrics in front of me, I become like a little warped by them to, try and increase them. So yeah, some competitive energy kicked in that was productive.
So the conventional wisdom, I think, for quite some time is that online shorter is better. People have the attention span of a goldfish, blah, blah, blah. As a fiction writer, you're obviously are comfortable writing lots of words, but I'm curious about, when did you decide to go all in on these 10,000 word pieces? It's like a quarter of a business book, some of these articles, when, the conventional wisdom is, this thing needs to be read and consumed in 60 seconds or people won't care. Obviously it's working, but when did you realize that was working?
I actually started the newsletter with a very different format. It was called the Brunch Briefing, and it was like, a series of links plus, let's say, 500 or 1,000 words on some idea that I thought was interesting, a sector, a company. And it was really when I went full time and had sort of the bandwidth to focus more deeply, that it just became obvious that that's what I found interesting. That if I had the space for it, I would naturally want to just go deeper rather than broader, or increase the frequency. And I think I just got enough early feedback that it seemed to tie together very linearly, that the more time and the deeper I went on a piece, like the better it did. And so there was sort of a feedback loop where it was like, yeah, you're right. Like the sort of traditional wisdom is that it should be shorter and pithier and, fit into a thread in this certain way. But that's actually not what I'm seeing. And it's frankly not what I want to do. And so it sort of just worked out that way, that the data guided that. And then probably my personality also guided me that direction.
That's so interesting. And like, why do you think that is? I suppose, right? Like, because so much of the conventional wisdom media says the opposite. I think that every time I have launched a content program at a tech company, right, I've felt the force of that conventional wisdom. Everyone being like, oh, you can't write something that long, right? No one audience is going to read it. This is busy executives. It's busy VCs, PE guys, etc. But you seem to have caught their attention in this way and cultivated an audience who wants to go really in depth. So like, do you have any hypotheses about what the secret sauce is there?
My hypothesis is just that like it's a very undercompeted part of like, the attention stack, let's say. Like, we've now been really wired to consume attention as if we were like high frequency traders and we need to make, millisecond decisions, and we're taking in thousands of tweets or TikToks or Instagram. One, I actually don't think, people would probably disagree, but I don't actually believe like a great deal of influence is made that way. Like maybe in aggregate something happens, but I find very few of my decisions are borne out or are sparked by like extremely short form content. I think it is, so transient that it's designed to almost wash over you. And so, clearly the advent of influencer marketing would say that hypothesis of mine is totally wrong. But personally, at least that's, not my most durable ideas come from that. The other part is, just this competition piece that I feel like there's tens of thousands, millions of people that really compete to say the thing first and fastest. To me, that is like a really hard game to win and not a particularly interesting one. Like, I don't know, are you going to be the aggregator account who announces the fundraising first, or announces the firings first, or announces the new product first? Like, there's no competitive advantage in that I see, and it would like totally rot my brain. So I'd much prefer to do the version of things where it feels like there's no competition and you can be very differentiated, even if the audience is much smaller. I think it ends up meaning a lot more to those people.
I mean, it's in line with, I think, Substack's philosophy kind of how they built their platform, which is, it's, I think, fortunate that you made a bet on them early on.
Yeah, 100%.
Their whole thing is that, right, like the transient content that doesn't turn into paid subscribers is not going to get surfaced as much. And so they sort of geared their platform, and the community that shows up there kind of knows that too. Like, you're not there to endlessly scroll videos. You're there to find stuff that sort of enriches you that you might want to pay for. I think there's a good fit kind of platform and philosophy wise there as well, that, I mean, we're actually, we know the Substack folks well, and we talk about them, about how their platform is an example of, of the zag, that we talk about.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it would have been a lot harder had Substack not existed. I think they arrived at like a really lucky moment for me. So I'm grateful they've put in the work they have for that.
I'm curious about, what you, double clicking on what you said about kind of influence and impact, because despite the name influencers, a lot of influencer content, on especially like the visual social media platforms is about humor, or it's about beauty, or it's about products. I think what you sparked for me when you said that is that there is this sort of transactional nature of, if you're trying to sell like vitamin water or a pair of shoes or whatever, that sort of micro content in huge mass amounts can create that sort of nudge towards a purchase. But I can't think either. I bought plenty of pairs of boots on Instagram, but I can't think of any of those people whose advice would, or thinking would, change my mind about important decisions I'd make beyond, something that costs $200 or less. And I think what you're talking about strikes me as much more high, I guess, value or high intention decision-making that people are sort of making off of the type of content that you're doing at this level of depth.
Yeah, I think it's really good for sort of your lizard brain, right? Like you can sort of warp people's brain state in such a way that it can, drive you towards a purchase decision. I sort of distrust my own paradigm here, because I do imagine that maybe the younger generation spend so much time, and they maybe have a different information diet, where they have found some subset of TikTokers or influencers who might in 30 seconds be able to like give them some heuristic or model of the world that actually maybe that can stay with you. But like, at least personally, I don't find that has ever, I can't imagine any time that's really happened for me.
Well, I think those people do exist, right? Like, I'll use like Kyla Scanlon as one example, who writes a great kind of pop economics newsletter for Gen Z.
Yes.
But what I think she does a good job of is this interplay between the short TikTok, Instagram content, right? Where she's able to take an idea that an audience is never going to consume in a long form post. Like there's just some people who like aren't going to read Substacks, who aren't going to read our
Yeah.
books, right? Like that's just, I think, something that we have to accept as
Mm-hmm.
writers right now. And she's able to take it and distill those ideas and those heuristics into really punchy content. And then she also then has her Substack, which goes into a lot more depth. And she just wrote a
Yeah.
book, and she did a book tour. And, there's a lot of people who probably never would have read her Substack or read a book.
Mm.
I honestly misstated a second ago. They do end up doing that now because she has
Mhm.
intrigued them enough with these ideas. So I think for Gen Z in
True.
particular, there's an interplay there that we can learn from, right? And like there's a chance that also then opens it up for people who might read like my stuff or Shane's stuff or your stuff, right? By like bringing them into that ecosystem. So you just bringing it up like just got me thinking about like what is that kind of attention funnel as you put it in dynamic now, because I do think it's evolving in that way, and there is a way to kind of like capture those heuristics on video in a way that can funnel people into deeper and more influential ideas. I don't know if you guys agree.
Well, do you think without the the meaty stuff at the bottom of her funnel that quick stuff would have as much of it or have an impact?
No, I don't think it would. I think it's like it's like a content ecosystem or like attention funnel, as Mario said. That's kind of important, right? To have both components, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot in my own work, which is to say that sometimes we have this stubbornness around video, right? Where we say like, oh, I don't want to be making like reels because that's like trashy. It feels trashy in some ways, but really there's a subset of people. If you want to reach your people with as many people as possible with your ideas, where embracing those formats can help then lead them to the bigger ideas that you have. And like Mario, even you have you don't do, I think, as much short form real content, but you have a great podcast. Like speaking of the Substack guys, I was just listening to your interview with Hamish and Chris.
Nice.
I thought that was really fantastic, the way you kind of pulled their story out. And I imagine that like that video component has become a part of your overall content ecosystem.
Yeah, but to be honest, we're not very good at it. Like, I think the podcast itself, the conversations are good, but like when it comes to remixing it into that sort of atomic unit that is like, designed for this attention war where you're fighting against every other thing, like I find it really hard. And I think there's a real art to it. It's not an art that like I get super pumped about, but I do struggle with it because I don't really understand how it works in some dimension.
Your LinkedIn message box is just going to be crushed with people pitching you.
Oh God!
Short form videos.
No, please.
Yeah, I might just cut this clip just to troll you.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, this
exactly.
is the reel from this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
exactly.
pitch Mario now. Yeah.
So Joe, you told me this story about how you risked your job in hiring Mario and for something
Really?
some time
I didn't
ago.
know the stakes were that high.
Okay. Yeah.
Damn.
Okay. So I'll tell the story. So a couple of years ago, this is like almost 3 years ago now. I think it was 2023. But I was running marketing at this AI startup A team, and we were pivoting from focusing like very strongly on the startup market because the fundraising collapse had happened, and wanting to expand to more companies, but also reach more VC partners. And we're kind of undergoing this overall like brand definition repositioning, because I joined like the founding team a year before. We raised $55 million. We're growing really quickly, but just realized we needed to make like a little bit more of a splash, not be as reliant on startups, really expand the pie. And so looked at, what are sort of big things that I could do within, my budget, and made this pitch because I really like the Generalist. I really liked what you did. I just knew so many people who read your stuff, right? That my gut was like, if I did something on your kind of brand partner program, right, I bet that it would have an impact. But also it was an amount of money. Like I think it was 70 grand plus for, this kind of long-term profile of a team, that it was a risk for my job, right? Like
Wow.
if this didn't drive leads, I think that one of our founders like literally would have flown from Tel Aviv to America and like locked me in a closet or like just
Oh
fired me
man.
immediately. But when I talked to you about it, like, I really like that your ethos with it was I only do this for companies that I actually find interesting and would kind of write
Mm.
about anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Which from someone who's skeptical of sponsored content, a lot of the time I really appreciated. And the really in-depth sort of journalistic process that you laid out for doing it, like the interviews you wanted to do, like the access to kind of documents from us that you wanted. And then we put it out and it was bonkers. Like we got hundreds of really high quality leads and opportunities off the bat. You made me look super good
Oh, that's so
internally.
great.
Like really didn't do that much on it. And ever since then, I've just been really fascinated by the business model
Hmm.
of the Generalist, right? And I'd like love to dive into that a little bit because Shane and I are huge media entrepreneurship
Hmm.
geeks. I know a lot of the people that subscribe to our newsletters that this is going to be going out to, right, have a really strong interest in that as well. So, like, how does that whole ecosystem work? Like, I know you
Hmm.
have paid subs on Substack that's at a higher level than you see at most publications. I think it's like
Mm-hmm.
$22 a month for your standard tier, and then you're like a founder tier with more access that goes up to 500. I'm not sure if you're still doing these sponsored posts, but that seemed like a really
Mm-hmm.
good rev stream. You had an
Mm-hmm.
interview a few years ago where I think even just off the bat in like 2021, you're, making like really solid six figures on the Generalist. So break it down for us. Like, let us hear how you did this and maybe get to steal some of your secrets.
Wow, I'm really I had no idea the stakes
Way
were
to,
that
way to
high.
pitch him on stealing from him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad it worked out. Yeah, I'm happy to get into it. The business has like changed many times, honestly, and I think from year to year, there's always pieces that I want to try differently or sort of tweak the mix. I would say, now it's really primarily a subscription business. That was sort of a real decision we made. I want to say 2 years ago at this point, maybe 18 months, where it felt like the sponsorships were really great, but they were intense, right? Because we were charging a high price for them, and as a result, to make that worth people's while, you have to really devote yourself to it and try and create something truly great. And I think, I'm glad it worked in this case, and I think it worked, with actually pretty much everyone. I can't think of a time I'm like, oof, we didn't deliver for those folks. So it worked, but it was extremely manual, and you start from scratch every year, obviously. Also, as the newsletter grew, the price on that grew, the sales cycle on it also became really long. And I started to feel like I'm spending a lot of my time doing these touch points with folks where, it's reasonable that it actually would take a year for it to close, given what we're talking about. But it actually wasn't so fun for me. And so I sort of made the decision like, hey, I actually want this to be run in a very different way. And we took sort of a bit of a risk and a pivot and shifted from maybe like 80-20 sponsorships subscription to the other way around. And so we're really like almost at the other end of that, where we're sort of in terms of total revenue where we were 18 months ago, but just with a super different mix. And I feel much better about that, and sort of much happier about that going into each new year, where I feel okay, we have something compounding, and we can sort of try and grow that.
So you just like didn't want to deal with assholes like me anymore.
No, you were great to work with. Honestly, people are good to work with. It's just a lot to do, and if everyone was as easy as you, and also if these things just happened automatically, if after this was the best testimonial I could hope for, but if there were thousands of tens of people each year where I didn't have to think about the sales side, I could imagine doing it, but it just became too much about that and not enough about the writing.
Yeah, I feel that. And you felt like you were kind of central to that sales process. Like it wasn't something you could outsource to a seller or head of sales for the Generalist.
I don't think so. One, because like I'm partially selling during that, but also partially like vetting during that. Like I want to get a feel whether this is a story that I'm like actually going to get really excited about. And I don't know if like there's some level of like taste or, preliminary narrative building that I'm doing in my head to feel whether I'm going to get psyched to spend 3 or 4 months on this. And so I don't know if I could really outsource that super well.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to end up writing 12,000 words about some bullshit ChatGPT wrapper that's going to go out of business in 9 months.
Yeah, and honestly, also a lot of the times they become kind of CEO sales, or they did, and so I don't know. That starts to feel a bit strange. Where I'm saying to the CEO, like, "Hey, spend a decent chunk of your marketing budget with me, but please sort it out with this sort of outbound salesperson I have. But trust me with all of your most detailed information and spend a good amount of time with me once we kicked off the project." So
You
that
just
didn't sit out.
explained how all of marketing technology sales work.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well done for getting out of
I'm
that.
really
yeah.
naive.
Yeah.
I'm really naive.
It's like
No.
you're talking to this 22-year-old SDR who like literally doesn't know what a CRM is, and
Really?
we're gonna task him with selling to the executive team. Yeah,
you
this
go.
is there's a whole other podcast maybe on that I can just monologue about why marketing technology is broken today. But Shane, go ahead.
Oh no. Well done for getting out of that trap. No, I think on theme with this, you've evolved a lot. I really admire the adaptation. You're covering an industry that is changing so quickly in a world that's changing so quickly, and
Yep.
you are adapting as you go. What other things did you try that didn't work? What other things worked for a while, but you moved away from? Other
Most
than the
things I've
sponsorship
tried
thing?
haven't worked. I'll be honest. Like I feel like
Fair enough.
and that's good. I mean, I sort of would like to take a lot of shots, and if 10% of them stick, I see that as like a success because there's a very low cost of failure in this. Like if I try a series and people don't like it, like that's totally fine. You have to see where the boundaries are of this, and that's how you find the thing that actually people love. And that's how we landed on doing super long form case studies and all these other sort of things. It was just little experiments. So I try and not hold. I think I'm aggressively precious about this the like caliber of the writing, at least as I consider craft and caliber to be according to my own standard. But I'm extremely loose and flexible with like what forms that might take. So, we had a whole thing where we did collaborative analyses of IPO filings. It was called the S1 Club. Like that was an experiment that worked for a while, but eventually I phased it out. We did a standalone community product that, we made some amazingly good friends and connections, but like fundamentally it didn't work at some really basic level. So that phased out. I mean, there's really probably almost a dozen I could go through. I had a whole thing once called Product in Flight, which I thought was a really great idea. I don't think it's so good anymore, but it was just giving people access to the test flight of some new product and doing an interview with the founder about what they're going for, and then funneling a bunch of the feedback back to them. So it would be like, hey, if you're an early adopter, this is a fun thing to try, and here's what the person's aiming for. And but that didn't work at all. Maybe it would have worked with a different spin on it or whatever. But I like all of those experiments. I'm probably too oriented towards like finding the next new thing, at least at the very beginning of the Generalist. And now I think I've maybe calibrated better around, if I'm going to take a swing, like let's at least hope the upside is worth it, and that it would, it could be better than what we're doing already.
All right. So the flip side, what's worked the best?
What has worked the best? It's really sort of simple, boring stuff. Just doing the very, very long form stuff and stretching that to a level that I had thought about it 5 years ago, I would have thought that made no sense and was quite silly. And so writing, I think it was 35,000 words on Founders Fund, split across 3 pieces. Like I would have thought that didn't make any sense and it wouldn't do well. And there wouldn't be enough to that story. It was like an 18-month research process with them. Again, like I couldn't really envision that making any sense. And so sort of taking probably illogical bets on depth and hopefully quality have been the places where I think the bets have paid off most. I would say the same, honestly, in terms of sort of some of the brand investments, like arguably silly to try and buy the .com domain, to invest in artwork. We always, work with some amazing illustrators, but I do think that has probably worked out for us, and I'm glad we've done it. So those have been the the category of bets that I'm most happy about.
Those kind of map to something you said just a minute ago about taking really seriously the craft, but being really flexible on the format or on the, the strategy. If you're taking the brand and the, the presentation and the quality of the sentences and the quality of the art super, super seriously, and yet being very flexible about kind of everything else, that to me is sort of an aha that I think other people could take away from, this, like, if we're promoting this idea of zag when everyone else zigs, like, what do you want to hang on to? What do you want to not throw away as you're, looking for the next thing that you should do that not everyone's thinking about? Something too, like this deep craft in this era of, AI can spit out, mediocre craft for you. Really strikes me as important.
Yeah, I hope so. The speed at which these AI models are improving, it feels like maybe we're at a bit of a plateau now, but I certainly wonder how long I have an advantage for, but at least for, for now and hopefully a while longer, I do think having perspective, intention, and a level of depth to your craft is like, I don't know, some of the only durable advantages you can have as a writer, and probably more broadly, you can apply that to many other jobs.
I think there's an argument here, right, that the approach that you're taking actually becomes more valuable in an AI environment, because what you're, at least what I'm perceiving that the value is that you're driving, and please correct me if I'm wrong based on the conversations we have with readers, but at a price point that you're at, right? $20 a month, hundreds of dollars a year, like that has to hit this certain trigger of, I need this. There's a competitive advantage that I'm going to get from getting this. And what you're providing is a depth of reporting and storytelling that's uncovering things that aren't already out there, right? That you can't just go to Claude or ChatGPT and say, do a deep research report on Founders Fund, right? And you're going to get that. AI, is able to like refine and distribute the oil. It doesn't have the crude, like the writing, the reporting, the storytelling, unearthing those stories. Like that's the crude. And that's what it feels like you're pulling out. And then you're also kind of owning this space at the top or bottom. I'm trying to picture it in my mind of the attention funnel, right? By doing that. So as we're having this conversation, like that's to me what kind of feels like the unlock is, or what, at least for me, one of the big takeaways that I'm taking and want to write about afterwards, right? Is like this idea of everyone else is zigging by going hard on short form, quantity, hooky content, etc., taking and repurposing things that already exist and have been reported on in stories that have been told out there, which these tools now make very easy through deep research. But by sticking to a model of depth and unearthing information that people don't already have, whether it's through the profiles that you're doing or things like the startup database that you offer, right? You're able to give something exclusive that feels like it gives people an edge. Do you think my theory is right there, or is there something else that you think is making the company so successful where you have, these thousands of high-paying subscribers and, it seems to be an extremely profitable media business?
Yeah, I think the sort of maybe the other two pieces that have been important, it's sort of, yes, the primary research really makes a difference because that is where you get sort of novel information that no one has brought out before. Two, I would say sort of the like synthesis of that information is where you can have differentiation versus a traditional media outlet that actually does often great reporting, but the synthesis can often be quite shallow in my opinion. And then third is sort of like the storytelling, which is part of that, but like there's some aesthetic element that I felt going into the Generalist. I was like, wow, business writing is really anodyne and so like soulless, and like it's insane to me that all of this technology is like some of the most important stuff on the planet, and the people making it are some of the most strange, interesting outlier people on the planet. And often the way that these characters and their dramas are written is either like so insanely negative that it just becomes like warped in some mirror that, and look, some of these people certainly deserve a negative telling of their story, but it really lacked like the psychological nuance of like great fiction to me, or great stories in general, where you're actually like peeking into the heads of these people and understanding the trade-offs and understanding the inflection points and who they are. And that felt like a huge miss for me. And so I would say the primary research piece is something that has grown a lot with the Generalist over time, but we certainly didn't start with that because I didn't have the access. I didn't have the ability to go to a company and say, "Hey, I'm this guy. Like, please, can I interview all your management?" I think if we talk about AI, the latter 2 points are the parts that I feel unclear of how durable my advantage is there, because presumably at some level the models get good enough that their synthesis is better than me and their storytelling is better than me. And so maybe my only hope then is to have better primary research that I can then, improve my level of synthesis and storytelling beyond the AI again. But these are also hypothetical, and it's impossible to know, when that's exactly happening.
Yeah,
God.
it's a great question or debate. I won't go super deep on it, but I think the synthesis to me seems certainly plausible, right? I think like you already see this with deep research or with Claude's deep thinking, like the synthesis is good. I think storytelling is a lot more complex because so much of what makes storytelling meaningful for us is like the ability to sort of extract those key details around the characters, right? That make the story pop. Like I'm reading Karen Howe's How to Build an Empire, the OpenAI book right now. I might be butchering that title, but yeah, everyone knows the big AI book that everyone is reading, OpenAI book that everyone is reading. And it's like fascinating the way that she pulls out these different character studies that there's no way that you get without the reporting. Like I don't think AI can ever do that. But also too, the perspective that we have as storytellers, the choices that we're making, I think to other human beings is what makes stories meaningful to people, right? Maybe just on a pure information basis that isn't as important. We're fine getting just pure information and synthesis from AI. But I'd be a little more skeptical actually on the storytelling piece being something that doesn't remain a lasting advantage for us. And maybe I'm, pie in the sky a little bit optimistic here, but just when we see the studies of how people just reject AI generated content and stories once they know that it's AI generated, it gives me a lot of hope that there's something fundamental into who we are in human beings where we want to get our stories from other humans.
I hope that's true. Yeah. And
Yeah, me too.
May very well be.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to our last 2 questions.
So as we wind down, thank you for spending so much time with us. We like to ask, and I think in particular for you as a big reader and a researcher, who are you following nowadays that you think embodies this idea of when the rest of the world zigs, it pays to zag? Who are you paying attention to?
I really admire what Francis Ford Coppola did with Megalopolis. Is it Megalopolis? Megalopolis?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a huge flop, right? It didn't work at all. Yet I think it was an amazing swing and so cool that someone would put up so much of their own money and be so obsessively true to their own vision that they would spend, multiple decades trying to bring this to life. And I sort of, there's been some discussion around maybe this becomes sort of a cult classic movie in the fact that
I think so.
I think so too. And I kind of love that for it. And so that feels like a suitably strange, unusual outcome for like such a, unusual swing. And so, that seems like a very, very big zag where, everyone else is relying on really fine-tuned, well-tested IP and taking as little, financial risk as possible for someone to be that artistically brave and not have it work in this case, but to take the swing is I think the important point.
I love that. And I do agree. I would predict that in the long run, we'll look back and say it did work. It just took, 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's very in play.
I also just love the symmetry of you choosing the crazy long movie as
yeah, exactly. He really did it on length. Yeah, you can't fault him for that.
And last question. What is one counterintuitive idea that you think everyone listening to this should consider?
Well, I think it's extremely good to quit things. That's something I really believe. I think, the sort of thing that would be stamped on a mug would be, never give up, never surrender,
Right.
or never quit, et cetera, et cetera. And it struck me that like many of the best things in my life have happened because I quit something. As we started this conversation, there were many, many weird chapters at the very beginning that required me quitting to go to the next stage. And it was only because I tried a lot of different things that I think I was able to find something that was sort of like uniquely well suited to my personality. Yeah, I think people really test within a very narrow band of possibilities a lot of the time, particularly when it comes to careers. We're sort of taught that success is extremely linear and you have to follow a certain pattern. And if you deviate from that pattern, you're sort of doing something wrong that you should be a bit embarrassed about in front of your friends who have gone to grad school or gone to law school or gone to medical school. And I've just come to appreciate the fact that I think basically almost all of the most interesting people I've met and many of the most successful have had to try many nonlinear things and have very nonlinear journeys. And there's no way to do that without some amount of quitting.
I love that.
As someone who quit my job a year ago and has never been happier, it absolutely resonates with me. And so remember, kids, winners often quit.
There you go.
Yeah, stoicism. No, that's not the point. But
stoicism was the other name for this podcast.
The lateral thinking, I think, there is the key point. Is that you don't change the world by sticking to the path that everyone else has tread and told you need to stick to. If you want to do something that breaks out, you have to break out. So I appreciate that.
All right, Mario, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. This is fascinating. I learned a ton, and we hope to have you back on again soon.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Thank you both so much.